Friends, Bison, country folk, good to be with you again. We're going to explore E Pluribus Unum today, which is part 8. So we've moved through a couple different spaces, like parts of our purpose. So the first being all created equal, that was part 6. And then part 7, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And now part 8. This is one of the more challenging parts for a lot of folks because it deals with the subject of faith. And because we have this, on one hand, very explicit First Amendment protection of the right to worship in any way we see fit. And on the other hand, we have this kainekwa that is a framework for governance, but it's based on a moral, spiritual, cultural foundation. Similarly, like capitalism is based on Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments. So like you can't really have matter without spirit. And I know many of you might even identify as atheists or agnostics. We're going to touch on that in a bit. So just want to name that talking about spirituality can be very arresting, triggering for folks because of spiritual abuse and let's just say all the ways in which religion has not lived up to its initial intentions. The same way our nation has not fulfilled its initial intentions either. So just want to name that. We are paddling through choppy waters. Again, before we begin, this is all free in the spirit of the giveaway spirit of the Bison. So if this moves you, you want to pay it forward, please consider a donation to the American Prairie. And again, thank you to Jared Brick and Brickhouse Media for putting all this together. So let's dive in. Part 8, E Pluribus Unum. So I'm going to share a quote first. This is it's attributed to John Winthrop in 1630. So aboard the ship, the Arabella, which was one of the first ships. It might have been traveling alongside the Mayflower. I'm actually not sure. En route to what's called, New England. And so its veracity is somewhat debated, but the sentiments seem to be in line with what the current historical understanding of the religious pilgrims that came here. So, quote, to provide for our posterity, to do justly, to love mercy, we must be knit together in the work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities. Try that again. Superfluities. I think it's fluidities. Oh, anyways, it's all this is in Old English and different spellings and all that. So basically saying we must not live in excess, not be superfluous about our lifestyles. For the supply of others' necessities, we must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work. Pause here for a second. So they believe they had a divine appointment, a charter by God. And that is what's called the commission, capital C, and community, also capital C, which we'll talk more about here in a bit. Our community as members of the same body. So shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. We shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in the work we have undertaken, and so cause him to shame the faces of many God's worthy servants, and cause their prayers to be turned into curses. End quote. So notice there's a similar theme here between what John Winthrop is alleged to have said in 1630 and what Rabbi Weiss said in, I think, 1869 from the part 7. So I open with the Rabbi Weiss quote that basically we're performing the Lord's work. And the only thing that can prevent the Lord's work, our work from happening, is our own wickedness, our own witiko. So Winthrop said it without theoretically having any understanding of witiko, but obviously the understanding of the Christian notion of evil. So just think about that for a second. There's got all these pilgrims on this boat getting beaten about in the North Atlantic. And he's writing and saying this to his people, like, hey, we are one body. Let's get it together. Let's center ourselves in our divine commission, put others' needs above our own, meaning like, don't be selfish. Like if you have extra, it's the African phrase, like best place to store meat is in the belly of my brother kind of thing. And that we have to keep each other accountable and stay steady in the work and not be sidetracked by evil or selfishness or wickedness, or we will be cursed. So yeah, this starts to get pretty, Old Testament fire and brimstone here. I have those tendencies, so I will try not to do that, not to be superfluous in my judgment here. So I'll share another quote. This is from Benjamin Franklin. And this is during the kind of debates about how to constitute the United States, like what form it should take. And one of the big things was like, hey, should we name God? Even though we want this religious freedom, freedom to worship, but should we name something that is like about this is a divine appointment? And at the time, the founders were like deists. Like Franklin was a deist. Some were still outright Christians. Lots of folks were participating in Freemasonry. So they were engaged in multiple different allegiances to the eternal or to transcendent principles. And so they knew they had to be open, but also like to name that they weren't just doing this to like throw off the yoke of British rule so they could keep their slaves. Like there was something spiritual about this. So here's Franklin's quote. I have so much faith in the general government of the world by providence, capital P. So like God's providence. It rewards us for our faith in a sense. That I can hardly conceive a transaction of such momentous importance to the welfare of millions. I'm talking about the union of the colonies and the government. That it should be suffered to pass without being in some degree influenced, guided, and governed by that omnipotent, omnipresent, and beneficent ruler, end quote. So Franklin's saying, like, if we really believe we are this city upon a hill, this beacon, like what kind of hubris would it take for us to think that God wasn't driving? Or whatever the concept is. As we've touched on before, they decided to name God as nature's God. So there's nature, not a faraway, Christian God in the clouds or anything like that, but that every living thing is God, aka everything is God. So in an early draft of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson began it with, we hold these truths sacred and undeniable. So Jefferson's, who also had deep connections with indigenous mentors and elders in his upbringing, understood that this was sacred work too. To constitute a union of colonies was sacred. All right, and then continuing this thread, President Kennedy said, this country cannot afford to be materially rich and spiritually poor. So we can't have nice things unless we are also sourced in some kind of spiritual foundation. So I know that's a lot here, and I told you this is going to be choppy water, so get your oars in the water. We're going to go. So before we move into the spirit layer of our democracy, Pluribus Unum, we need to illuminate the role that faith plays in our lives and the origin of our nation. Although our Constitution explicitly forbids the state from establishing an official religion, the faith and spiritual life of the framers, which varied from religious rationalism to deism to Freemasonry to Christianity, greatly informed their work. While the framers refused to allow any specific mention of religion other than the novel term nature's God, spirituality was implied in and the overarching context for the establishment of our government. This part, meaning this part of this book, seeks to make this connection explicit and personal. As such, what follows may be challenging, especially for those of us who take issue with religion, or who have been spiritually abused, or are aware of the manner in which Wetiko has co-opted all religions to wage war and even enact genocide, and/or have not developed a personal, or if someone has not developed a personal spiritual practice or identity. So pause here for a second. Genocide, ongoing, happening right now in Gaza, Israel. So the United States and Israel are the two covenantal nations, the ones that say we're not just about this ethnic or religious group, we are about this idea. And they're creating a genocide right now. We are. Your taxpayers, mine, or your tax dollars, my tax dollars are funding a genocide, an active genocide in Gaza as we speak. Just saw it today. In a few days, 15,000 babies are going to die because of what's happening. They're withholding aid and not just die from a bomb, starvation, because there's a siege happening. So you are right to mistrust institutional religion. I know the Catholic Church got a new pope, and for all his merits and the merits of the previous popes, they're still a colonizing religion. They still colonized Latin America and Africa. So there's good and bad. Wetiko runs through every idea, every human heart, mine, yours, everything. So just take a deep breath. There's no fairy tale promised land where there's no evil. Religion is as guilty as everything else. Okay. In the way that the Kai Nekroa and the First Amendment makes room for all faiths and relationships to faith, including the lack thereof. In the way that Unitarian Universalism, the faith I practice, and Reformed Judaism welcome the atheist and agnostic orientations of their members, we too make room for it all here in the United States. Yet we must also acknowledge that even atheism, scientific materialism, and secular humanism are themselves beliefs. They require believing in the unprovable. For example, atheists willingly choose to ignore or dismiss the vast amount of first-hand testimony, literature, and research on spiritual experience. So put a pin in here for a second. A lot of I've got plenty of atheist friends, and the justification for their worldview is well, you can't prove it, you can't see it, it can't be measured. Well, you can measure what people say, and people say stuff. And if enough people say something, that's worth paying attention to. If a statistically significant number of people say something, that's what's called science. So science is not just math, physics, chemistry, all the hard sciences. It's also the soft sciences. And so a lot of atheists choose to ignore this entire field called cultural anthropology, comparative religion, like the study of religious literature. I mean, there's all sorts of fields that atheists are just nope, that's a figment of other people's imaginations. I have to willingly stay ignorant of what they're experiencing, so that I can keep my identity intact as somebody who hates God, religion's bad, and all that kind of stuff. So it's all kind of based on this groupishness that we talked about before. Again, there's nothing against atheism. It's just saying you don't get a pass on meaning making or faith or belief. Everybody believes in something. So we'll get into that here in a second. Scientific materialism cannot isolate or establish the 0, 1, 2, or 3-dimensional realities required to validate the experience of the 4 that we experience. So like height, width, depth, and time. Like we can't study any of those other dimensions. So we have to take it on faith that they actually exist, whether they could exist, because we experience these 4 or more dimensional realities, which folks in different spiritual disciplines say they go to different planes and all that kind of stuff. And then if we turn to quantum mechanics, we look at there could be 20, 30, 40 different dimensions beyond height, width, depth, and time. So there's a bunch of stuff that the physical sciences are pointing to that we've not experienced or are able to measure. And yet we will move around and act as though that's all that matters, or some of us do. So thus, this too is faith. Further, the core practice of the scientific method is itself not solid. Given the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which means you can know, I believe it's a thing's direction and location. You can only know one of the two, and not both. So you can actually know when and where a thing is. On a related note, like the universe is omnicentric. We actually don't know where the center of it is. It just keeps expanding in all these different directions. So where anything is in relationship to what we experience here on this pale blue dot, it's all relative to this vast unknown of position, multi-centric, omnicentric positionality. It's all relative. And the manner in which subject and object have been shown to be quantumly entangled. So the scientific method requires these two to be separate for the method to be valid, but they are not separate. They're quantumly entangled. Multiple experiments have proven this. So this renders the scientific method deeply flawed, as it cannot meet this foundational requirement that it's set for itself. So all of like the fancy book learning, great, and it's still not solid. It's not, you can't actually prove the foundations upon which all the other disciplines are built upon. So it's, you likely know, it goes like physics, chemistry, organic chemistry, biology, then social sciences, and then the economics and politics and capitalism, all that kind of stuff. But on the base layer, we don't know a bunch of stuff with our minds because we can't study it, we can't see it, we can't test it. So all this is to say that we all believe in something we cannot prove. Making meaning of our observed reality or the human condition is endemic to the human condition. Whether we're religious or anti-religious, scientific or anti-scientific, whether we believe in the flying spaghetti monster or the Marvel universe or the next paycheck or the next fix, we don't get a pass on meaning making. All of us believe in and thus worship at least one unprovable idea, whether or not we want to admit it. And so the question is, and I had this included in previous drafts, are we believing in the right ideas? In the ones that are true for us, that feel most true for us? Are we believing in ideas that serve us and others, are consistent with living in a democracy? That's the big question. Excuse me. So, as we've explored, our nation is not a religious ethno-state, but rather a multi-faith, multiracial, covenantal nation devoted to the idea of equality above all else in feel, form, and function. A covenant, while not a religion per se, is a matter of faith, like that of a marriage or the spirit of any other contract. A covenant is an active, deliberate binding of oneself to another or others. Unfortunately, only those of us who are naturalized citizens, public servants, first responders, or armed service members have had the opportunity to bind themselves and take their vows to our nation. So I think you know what I'm talking about, right? Like they have to take an oath of office. Most of us have it. Yeah, we raised our hands and did the Pledge of Allegiance and all that, but we didn't we weren't given the choice. They're like, all right, it's time to stay or go. Here's what staying means. And if you don't like it, get out. Like we just say, no, you were born here, you're fine. At least it's still a law that if you're born here, you're fine. And as I shared in the earlier parts of the book in the intro, even those public servants and first responders, naturalized citizens, are first led into an initiatory pathway into adulthood to make that choice. So we're still talking about more or less psychological adolescents who have to then take an oath. In the same way I don't want to say force, but we tell kids, they're like 17, 18, to take on $200,000 of debt because of some promised future economy that we all know is not going to be there. So all this is to say, like, we need adults to actually take a vow. You've all seen it. I'm sure I've mentioned it before. You go to a wedding. You're like, this could work. But what I know for sure is like, these aren't two adults standing up there at the altar. Like these aren't people who have gone through an initiatory pathway, know themselves and are clear on their life purpose, have integrated all their parts, have begun the healing of their childhood traumas, are living a right livelihood, a authentic life. We know that that's not what we're saying. We're saying like two psychological adolescents saying grown-up words, but so in a sense, you can make the argument that there are no U.S. citizens, or very few, like maybe a millionth of 1%, like a very tiny few. So we have a lot of work to do, team. So the rest of us haven't been given the opportunity to take our vows. In this sense, we've left our framers at the altar. But what exactly are our vows? So to develop our vows and root us in this civic faith, in the fall of 1776, Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams were tasked by the Continental Congress to create a seal and a motto for the nation. Their efforts failed to produce a consensus, and the committee was disbanded. It took 8 more years and 2 subsequent committees to finalize the seal in 1784 with E Pluribus Unum as our motto, suggesting that a great deal of debate and likely prayer, reflection, counsel, and ritual, as many founding fathers were Freemasons or deeply connected to their First Nations counterparts, deists. So a lot of thought and reflection probably went into divining and consecrating the spirit layer of this new nation. Perhaps it took 8 years because they were looking for the precise wording that would honor all faith and contemplative traditions, including those without one. If that is true, then E Pluribus Unum, out of many one, would be a great choice, as it is sourced in the ancient and archetypal wisdom of our in the ancient archetypal wisdom that is revealed increasingly in our physical sciences. From the West, sages such as St. Augustine, Cicero, and Pythagoras invite us to become one through love. From Cicero, we understand that, quote, when each person loves the other as much as himself, it makes one out of many, which is unus fiat ex pluribus. So this is the same open tent of Abraham, the orphan at home with Muhammad. It is Ubuntu, from the African Bantu, I am because we are, or Tat Vam Asi from Hindu means I am that, or Matakwi Wasan from Lakota, all of my relations. El Lachech Halaken from the Maya, I am you, you are me. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce this Siquan. But it basically translates to, I see no stranger, I see no enemy. It is the Bible's call to love thy neighbor as thyself. It is worth noting that the power of this wisdom is a twofold expression. It's a realization of love of others and self. So pause here for a second. You've probably heard the term multiple paths up the mountain. There's only kind of one divine reality, and all spiritual practices kind of get us to the same place, or trying to prepare us to love another as much as we love ourselves. So they're trying to morally, spiritually, culturally prepare us to love everything, to become one with it all, to become spiritually enlightened, in this sense. And which is great. But we're kind of unique now that we're in this highly fragmented, traumatized world where most of us have psychic parts, splits, like different parts. Like I literally just last night in my men's circle did a piece trying to reconcile my sovereign king and what I'll call this kind of, pre-verbal, tender, affectionate lover, which I called caramel in the process, but it's basically just the part of me that just wants love and tenderness and caress and affection. When I tried to reconcile them, I've been doing this for 20 some odd years, still working. So to love someone as much as yourself is limited by how much you love yourself. And you can't love yourself until you know yourself. So that's what we're going to dive into here. So these are nice sentiments and a worthy goal, but these are not our lived experience. This is not how our political economy functions. It's not how we scroll, return shopping carts, or drive during rush hour. So how do we make it real? That depends on how we understand and frame the problem of lovelessness in our lives. We cannot love anyone that we do not truly know. We cannot love ourselves until we deeply, wholly know ourselves. So to fulfill this love, this spiritual aspect of our nation's purpose, it is incumbent upon each of us to develop the necessary self-love that can only come from inner work, from personal and spiritual development. Here again, we are called to turn to practices such as healing the traumas of our past, engaging in self-reflection, purpose activation processes, shadow integration work, contemplative practice, experiencing other cultures, travel, and receiving ongoing reflection of trusted mentors and elders who are further along the journey. Once established in our own wholeness, we can love ourselves fully, warts and all, and access the ability to see the dignity and beauty in others. And then we can truly love others as much as we love ourselves. When we take this on, we become the expression of agape, the ancient Greek notion of universal love and divine goodwill towards all, including ourselves. So it's beyond eros, romantic love, and philia, brotherly love. The Greeks understood agape to be the highest expression of love, expressing the divine and deeply interconnected nature of reality in our thought, our word, and deed. From this place, we unlock what the Judeo-Christian and Buddhist traditions practice as compassion, and the Hindu practice of karma, service to those in need, and bhakti, worshiping the divine in all of us. Thus, E Pluribus Unum is not just a phrase on our paper and coins, but an active, guiding, and lifelong spiritual practice that amplifies the world's soul, honors its diverse peoples and faiths. First, by beginning at home with ourselves. Unfortunately, the power and meaning of E Pluribus Unum fell from view over time as Wetiko defiled our national character through human trafficking, forced labor camps, native genocide, bison and whale specieside, manifest destiny, rape culture, Jim Crow, etc. To mark our fall from grace as part of our Cold War, Red and Pink Scare propaganda efforts to conflate heteronormative Christianity, capitalism, and democracy. In 1956, so almost 200 years after the founding, we changed our motto to "In God We Trust." Not the same thing as E Pluribus Unum, but this dark spiritual coup legitimized our shadows and laid the foundation for a white, corporate, Christian ethno-state. So this is what I'm talking about recently around the genocide that we're currently enacting with our friends in Israel. This is obviously a faithless violation of our covenant, our founding documents, the Great Seal, the First Amendment, the Kayanekwa, and Bison medicine. While that was not our fault because we weren't there, we have the opportunity and the obligation to stop white Christian nationalism and the mega funders who believe that God wants the U.S. to be a Christian nation. It is time to push back against our corrupt and faithless Wetiko masquerading as religion and history. It is time to resurrect and recommit to our first principles and reestablish them as an explicit article of faith. As our framers understood, the Pluribus Unum is the third layer of democracy, the spirit level that completes our nation's holy trinity, along with all created equal and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's spirit, the Pluribus Unum, the mind, all created equal, and the body, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is required to sustain our democracy. With this third layer, our state can truly become a nation. We need more than a shared history, more than a working democratic government, more than Bison medicine, our principles. We need an active civic faith. And while our nation intends and inspires to honor all faiths and communities, and those without faith traditions, there is also an omnipresent, inclusive, and binding and spiritual task of our covenant. As Whitman, Melville, and Dickinson showed us, when we discover, love, and integrate all parts of ourselves, we become whole, a full, loving, and upright adult, capable of vocation, integrity, and agency. Similarly, when we love others as much as ourselves, we become whole and unified as a nation. When we do both, we will become the United States enfleshed, fulfilling our covenant with a loving faith, honoring of and unified in our diversity. Hosea Royce, John Lewis, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. described the world available to us within this faith as beloved community, meaning that love is the primary state and currency of all our relations. In King's speeches and writing, he illuminated a vivid, loving picture, suggesting that E Pluribus Unum is the mountaintop, the goal of our nation and humanity itself, where we love each other, where all are actively and ongoingly created equal, where justice prevails, and every person who calls this nation home has dignity, belongs, and has the rights of passage, rights to things, and resources to fulfill their unique potential. As Dr. King said, quote, "In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality." So it wasn't just the Lakota, the Haudenosaunee, the Transcendentalists, and our civil rights leaders who saw this mountaintop, who believed in it, and worked tirelessly towards a more perfect union. This vision is available to all of us if we open our hearts and soften our eyes. Whether we find ourselves in the valleys or in the plains, deserts, shores, or streets, E Pluribus Unum is here, waiting for us to do the inner work and experience the greatest of loves. It's there on cross-country road trips, basketball courts in Harlem, soccer pitches in Florida, at harvest festivals in Illinois, at basic training at Fort Liberty, at vigils in Oakland, in the Unitarian Universalist churches, YMCAs, DMVs, karaoke bars, open mic nights, and county fairs throughout the nation. It's here, it's real, and it's ours. If we soften our eyes, if we open our souls, receive it, and devote ourselves to it. And we must make it our lasting expression, our legacy, the spiritual purpose that our society, economy, and government must fulfill for all life here and on behalf of all of humanity. So that concludes part 8. Here's the summary. E Pluribus Unum resonates with, welcomes, and amplifies every spiritual tradition, including those without. E Pluribus Unum is democracy's spirit layer, the third leg of the stool, without which our republic will not stand. E Pluribus Unum requires that we first love ourselves by healing our wounds, activating our purpose, becoming whole, and then meeting each other with love, understanding, and devotion. The discussion reflection questions. What moment or place most spiritually connects you to our nation? What do you need to let go of in order to fully love yourself? What beliefs and judgments do you need to transform in order to love your fellow country folks as much as yourself? That's part 8, folks. Still have a lot more to go. We're nearing the end. Probably about maybe 2/3 way through, give or take. So we've got next part is the Bison medicine protocol. So how to begin this journey if you're starting from scratch. I know most of you aren't. You've already read a bunch, done a bunch of inner work, but if you're starting from scratch, here's how you would begin. So that's part 9. Then we'll conclude and move into the appendices. So with this understanding and awareness and hopefully transformation, purpose, culture, spirit, now how do we reconstitute the nation? That's what we look at in the appendix. But first things first, we have to do the root work, and then it's up to you. It's not up to me. It's up to y'all. How we're going to take this country back and make it what it ought to be. See you soon. Oh, thanks, Jared, Brickhouse Media, and please consider a donation to AmericanPrairie.org.